What if the real reason you feel mentally exhausted isn't because you're doing too much, but because you're absorbing too much? The answer might change how you live your life, and we'll get to it by the end of this video. In today's hyper-connected world, silence has become rare. Notifications buzz, timelines scroll endlessly, voices shout from every direction, and opinions flood our minds whether we seek them or not. We've become so used to the noise that we barely recognize it as the source of our restlessness. But deep down, we crave stillness. We long for clarity. And this is where the wisdom of Stoicism offers a powerful answer. The way forward is not to push harder, but to step back into silence. The Stoics believe that the quality of our thoughts determines the quality of our lives. But how can we think clearly when we're constantly distracted? Imagine trying to hear a quiet melody in a room full of blaring speakers. That's what happens to your inner voice in a noisy world. It becomes drowned out, confused, and eventually forgotten. To reconnect with that voice, the voice of reason, of wisdom, of calm, you must reduce the noise. You must create space for silence to do its work. This silence is not just the absence of sound. It's a mental space, a decision to disengage from the unnecessary. It's the quiet courage of turning off the news, logging out of the chaos, and choosing not to react to every provocation. It's found in moments when you resist the urge to argue, to post, to defend, to impress. In those quiet moments, you reclaim something most people have lost: your focus. Focus is not a talent, it's a discipline, and it begins with cutting the noise. You can't focus when your mind is filled with the chatter of 1,000 voices. The Stoic trains the mind like a warrior trains the body, not in battle, but in preparation. In the stillness, strength is built. When you deliberately withdraw from the noise of the world, you're not retreating. You're sharpening your edge. You're preparing to return to the world not reactive, but deliberate. But why is it so hard to disconnect? Because we've been conditioned to believe that being constantly on is a form of productivity. That knowing everything, responding to everything, and never missing out somehow makes us better. But the Stoics would disagree. Seneca once wrote that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. And much of that imagined suffering comes from consuming noise that was never meant for our minds in the first place. When you hear too many voices, you begin to doubt your own. When you compare your life constantly to others, you forget the value of your own path. When you're always reacting to stimuli, you lose your ability to act with intention. And when you're flooded with opinions, you lose clarity on what you actually believe. Cutting the noise is not a luxury. It is a necessity for anyone who wants to live with purpose. In Stoic practice, silence is a tool for realignment. It's how you recalibrate your mind, realign with your values, and rediscover the core of who you are. When you eliminate the unnecessary, whether it's content, conversations, or commitments, you begin to hear something deeper. You hear the space between thoughts. You feel the tension in your body. You start noticing what you've been avoiding and what actually matters. And that's when real focus becomes possible. Not the kind of forced attention that burns out quickly, but the calm, centered focus of someone who is grounded. The kind of focus that leads to clear decisions, deep work, and meaningful relationships. When you are no longer pulled in every direction by noise, you begin to move with clarity in one direction, with purpose. Cutting the noise also means cutting access. Not everyone should have access to your attention, your time, or your energy. Just because someone speaks, posts, or demands your response does not mean you are obligated to engage. Stoicism teaches us to respond, not react. Silence gives you the space to choose your response wisely. It's the space between the stimulus and the action where freedom lives. When you are silent, you gain power over your choices. But silence requires strength. It takes courage to not jump into every conversation, to not defend yourself at every insult, to not broadcast your every move. But that restraint is where true power lies. The Stoic knows that noise is often just a cover for insecurity. The louder someone is, the more likely they are seeking external validation. The quieter someone is, the more they trust themselves. You don't need to be everywhere, know everything, or speak all the time to be in control. In fact, the people who make the biggest impact are often those who speak less but say more. They use their silence as a filter and their words as tools, not weapons. Every moment of silence is a moment of listening, observing, and understanding. And from that understanding comes clarity. And from clarity comes strength. Your attention is your most valuable resource. Where you place it determines the direction of your life. If you allow noise to dominate your attention, you will live reactively, bouncing from one distraction to the next. But if you protect your attention fiercely, if you choose silence when others choose noise, you will develop a mind that is disciplined, focused, and clear. Now, let's return to that question we began with. What if the real reason you feel mentally exhausted isn't because you're doing too much, but because you're absorbing too much? The answer is yes. Your exhaustion is not just from action, it's from mental input overload. You are constantly absorbing information, emotions, energy, and noise that your mind was never meant to carry. And the only way to restore your strength is to cut the noise and return to silence. Silence is not emptiness. It is alignment. It is where your thoughts settle, your emotions soften, and your priorities become clear. It is where you rediscover your voice, not the one shaped by the world, but the one that was always yours. In silence, you remember what matters. You remember who you are. So, take this as an invitation, not to escape the world, but to rise above its noise. To create moments of silence each day, not to be passive, but to become more powerful. Choose silence over reaction. Choose clarity over clutter. Choose intention over impulse. And watch how your mind transforms, not by doing more, but by absorbing less. That is the Stoic path, and that is the power of cutting the noise.